Hi, welcome. I'm Matt from Extract Brewing Co. If this is your first time joining us, I'd like to say thanks for stopping by. I have an Instagram account at Extract Brewing Co. You can follow me there for more interesting projects and things that you'll see before they hit the YouTube channel. Speaking of the YouTube channel, we deliver content every other Thursday. So, with all that being said, let's talk about beginning brewing. I'm often asked by the people at work or people that I encounter that find out that I'm a home brewer, what's the best way to get started? I often advise people to start with a 5-gallon batch system. You can stop by your local homebrew store and talk to them and see what they have in stock, what they can carry or what they can order. Also tell people to start off with Extract Brewing, as we'll discuss today. So after you get your hands on a kit that you're ready to brew with, a lot of times that's going to include something like a kettle, a fermentation vessel, probably a bottling bucket, some kind of stirring spoon or paddle, auto siphon tube or auto siphon hose. There's a couple different ways to go about doing that. A capper and some other minor things like either a refractometer or hydrometer. You're ready to brew. So an extract kit does all the hard work for you. Now those extracts, there's a lot of different ways that they can come. They can come with exclusively liquid malt extract. They can come with dry malt extract or a combination of the two. Some kits will come with some things called steeping grains, where you'll have to take those grains that are in a little baggie and you'll have to put them in the water at a certain temperature to be able to extract all of what you're trying to get from that grain, be it color, a certain malt profile, or some kind of combination of the two. Sometimes there's a steep to convert option or something along those lines. Generally, most of these kits aren't too terribly hard. They make great entry-level kits for people. A lot of your homebrew stores, your local guys, they'll have some kits that they make in-house for you. Generally, those grains and things like that are in there are a lot fresher. They probably haven't been sitting on a shelf for a year or 6 months or even 3 months at that point in time to make its way to you, and haven't gone through, things like the mail or a delivery truck and gotten hot, dropped, kicked, things like that. Normally, you just run down to your homebrew store. They've got a kit or can make a kit for you pretty quickly. So the kit that I chose at my local homebrew store, Hop and Grape, I chose their cream ale extract kit. Get the kit, get it home, go ahead and start unpacking it. Get that instruction sheet out, make sure that everything that's on that instruction sheet is there. I've gotten a few kits before where at other homebrew stores where the yeast wasn't in the package, or I forgot to grab the yeast while I was there. And so one of those tip things that I like to tell people is once you start doing a few of these kits, if it's something that you think you're gonna do, just grab a couple packets of US-05, keep them in your fridge. It's a good handy yeast to have around. So when you're unpacking the box and you're checking all your ingredients, go ahead and grab that yeast. Put it in the fridge if it's going to be a few days or a few weeks or months or whatever the case may be until you go brew. So that way that yeast stays viable, it stays healthy, and you don't have to worry about it going off. It won't go bad that way. You'll just take that extra precaution. Another thing that I go ahead and do whenever I'm unpacking my stuff, if I'm going to brew that day, I go ahead and pull all my ingredients out. The priming sugar and the caps I go ahead and put back in the box. I take that box, I store it away until I'm ready for it on bottling day. So on brew day, I often go ahead and take all my ingredients, I lay them out on the counter in order of progression that I need to use them or that I would like to use them. Like this one, the steeping grains will go first in order, and then it'll be the malt extracts, and then the hop addition. For this particular brew, I went ahead and opted in to go a little bit further or slightly more advanced, next step up, by adding a Warflock tablet and yeast nutrient. And then the last hop addition were laid out on the counter in order of operation. So that way I can help keep track of what I've already added, where I'm at in this. Keeping the instructions handy off to the side with a pen and kind of checking things off as you use it would be a great idea. I use the fermenter as a good guide for the amount of water that I need to add to the kettle. The instructions will tell you how much water to gather, and just using that fermenter, if it's got the graduated cylinder or graduated marks on the side of the fermenter, using that is a great way to make sure that you get what you need instead of, trying to just guess or get close. You'll be dead on at that point in time, and then you should come really relatively close to the projected in volume of the boil. And at that point, then you should come in really close to the projected gravities and projected in volume of both what's going in the fermenter and then what you're going to bottle. So after adding the water to the kettle and having the thermometer in the kettle, as things start to warm up, I'll start backing down on the heat just a little bit, so that way I don't have to all of a sudden have this giant boil going. It just gets up to heat normally. The first heat that you probably need to shoot for these kits, if they have steeping grains, will be what we call like a strike temperature or steeping temperature for these grains. Most of the time these things are normally within like 152, 155 area to steep your grains in. So you don't want to reach boiling, you don't want to have to wait for that to come down, you don't want to have to add more water to bring the temperature down. If you just bring it up nice and easy, then it's just time to go ahead and throw in those steeping grains in the bag, so that way you can remove those grains very easily, let it kind of drain over the top of the kettle and get all the wort or water, let it all drain out of that bag and get back into that kettle. So next you want to go ahead and start getting ready to bring it up to a boil. What I like to do is I like to take that lid, place it most of the way back over that kettle so it kind of retains some of that heat in there. It'll bring it back up to temperature or get it up to temperature pretty quick. About 190, 185, 200 degrees, you want to make sure that you're pulling that lid off, because you do not want that lid on there once it reaches boiling. You'll make a mess, and then some of that steeping grains, wort that you've made will get all over the stove and be a little tough to clean up. That's not terribly tough to clean up. It's not until you have a boil over with malt extract that you'll have a problem. You'll be cleaning with all kinds of materials to get it off the stove. At this point, when you're coming up to temperature, you need to go ahead and take if you have any liquid malt extract that are in the cans or the bottles, what I like to do is go ahead and turn on the hot water in the sink, put those things in hot water, let them soak in there. That way it's kind of like the liquid malt extract's a lot like honey or molasses. It's real thick and syrupy. Sometimes it takes a little while for it to pour out of the container, so the hot water helps get it out. Another tip that I found is to take just a little bit of warm water in there after you've emptied out that container and kind of just slush it around in the container, and then pour that into your boiled kettle. So when it's coming up to boiling temperature and it's fixing to be time to add that malt extract, be it liquid or dry, you're going to want to get ready to kill the heat on that burner that it's currently on, and you'll want to have a place where you can pick up that pot, move it maybe to a different burner on the stove that's not heated or hot at that point in time to be able to add all that malt extract in. As you add it in, I recommend that you stir it up. That way, like, the liquid malt extract gets good and mixed in with the water. But that dry malt extract, as you dump it in, if you're not mixing it up, it'll cause clumps. And so it's just always good to kind of have a good little like whirlpool going as you're adding it in, and then stopping, turning it back around the other way. Just make sure that you've got it all kind of mixed in very well. At this point in time, after you got you've done your steeping grains and you've got your malt extract in there, it's all mixed up, it's a good idea to go ahead and move your kettle back to the burner for heat. Bring it back up to a boil. Again, you want to bring it back up slowly. You don't want to have this thing super cranked up. There's going to be a lot of sugars in this water, and so what can happen is you can kind of get some of that sugar burnt to the bottom of the kettle. It'll be kind of tough to remove. And also, if you have a super fast heat on this thing, you can have a boil over happen for you really quick. And this is a boil over that you really don't want to have. This becomes a sticky mess that takes a long time to clean off the stove. I've heard and seen people say that they'll touch the roof, or they'll get all over the fridge next to the pot or the cabinet, or it can come back at you. And most mistakes can happen at this point in time, be it the boil over. So you might want to just make sure that you keep drinking to a limited effect. The first couple brews, wait until after you're done with the boil before you crack open a beer. This is a pretty quick brew day. You can knock probably 2-3 of these things out in a day if you really wanted to. They go super quick, especially if you're taking some shortcuts that we'll discuss as far as the processes and things that I employ here. Once you've reached the boiling stage, it's time to follow the boiling schedule. So the way that the boiling schedule works is you have like 60-minute additions, you have 40-minute additions, 30, and etc. Some of them vary widely. Some of them you have maybe 2 additions all the way up to 6, 7, 8, 10, additions, just depending on what's all going on. So to just kind of keep this as basic as possible, this cream ale, it only had 2 hop additions. It had one at 60 minutes and it had one, I believe, at 5-minute addition. And then I added that Warflock tablet and the yeast nutrient. The Warflock tablet, what that's going to help do is both of those components, they don't add that much money to the cost of this brew, but what they do far exceeds their cost. So the Warflock tablet, it'll help you have a cleaner beer. It'll help knock out a lot of haze and starches and proteins and things like that. It'll help make a beer clearer. And I don't care if it's something that's supposed to be almost water looking or almost stout looking. Like, you can tell the difference between a clean beer and a not clean beer. There's other alternatives other than Warflock tablet. There's like Irish moss and a few other things, but I use Warflock. It's a cheap thing. I can buy it in bulk and keep it here, and I mean, it costs almost next to nothing after it's all said and done. Yeast nutrient, on the other hand, again, not that expensive to add to a brew. What this help does is helps the yeast get a good fermentation going. It's a little extra nutrients for them to kind of keep chewing through things. The gravity can get a little bit lower if these yeast are in a little bit healthier of a state. So depending on what you want to do, it may be a good idea. I always put yeast nutrients in everything. A lot of times when I'm using quite, I've seen that adding double the amount of yeast nutrients is a good idea. So when I use quake, I always double up on it, but that's a whole different story for later. A good thing to incorporate is get into some good habits after you've brewed a kit or two, such as adding the yeast nutrients, adding the wort flock tablet. When I first started brewing, I didn't hardly use any of that stuff, and so it took me a long time to kind of introduce that into every brew that I did. I kind of regret not having done it before. I think I could have maybe made a little bit better beer if I had. Just maybe making it looking clean, you know, presentation, they say, is a pretty big part of being judged. And you know, so if it looks kind of crappy, then, you know, maybe people won't enjoy it that well. Another beneficial thing is once you get into the boil schedule, additional piece of equipment that may help you out making very nice beer, or very nice looking beer anyway, is a hop basket. These baskets, they'll decrease the hop utilization, but it'll help also keep a lot of hop material out of the beer, especially there towards the end. If you have a kettle that doesn't have a dump valve or a strainer in it, and you've got to either take that kettle and you've got to pour it over into your fermenter, or you've got to use a siphon tube to get it out of the kettle into the fermenter, the hop basket will help you keep all that stuff from getting to the bottom of the kettle. So that's less stuff that you have to worry about getting into your fermenter, clouding up your beer, causing off taste, or even possibly infecting your beer later. Hop baskets can also be used to add spices or sugars. A lot of these hop baskets, as long as you make sure that it's not directly touching the bottom, you can pour sugar in there and it'll make sure that it'll help it dissolve quicker. So instead of it falling directly down to the bottom of your kettle where it'll burn, it'll stay kind of in that hop basket, and you can stir wort back into the basket and help dissolve it. So because most of these boil times will be 60 minutes, I often take the time to go ahead and get my fermenter ready. Go ahead, make sure that it's clean, make sure that it's sanitized and ready to go. Whenever my brew's done, I can go from that into my fermenter as quickly as possible. I don't have to worry about cleaning it after that. Word of advice and a tip on cleaning your fermenters and your bottling buckets and things like that. If they're plastic, don't use a brush, don't use a scrub brush, don't use a scrub pad or anything abrasive like that. You'll be amazed at how much that you can get away with cleaning with just a little bit of hot water, some soap, or some kind of cleaner like that that's not abrasive, and the palm of your hand with your fingers. I always just put a little bit of dish liquid soap in there, get some hot water in there, and then just start at the corner of the fermenter, take my finger around the ring there at the bottom, and start working the palm of my hand at the bottom of the fermenter, and then work my ways up through the sides and the wall of the fermenter to get it good and clean. Don't forget to make sure that your lid's clean, so that way you'll have a good fermentation. Always rinse out my fermenter about 2 or 3 times, make sure I get all the soap out of it, off the lid, and then following the recommendations of whatever sanitizer you're using, go ahead and follow that ratio to get it good and clean. When I'm sanitizing my fermenter, I also like to take the time to try and reuse that sanitation solution if I'm able to clean another fermenter or the bottling bucket or something like that, just to kind of keep everything clean. I try to make sure that I put things up clean. This is one of those points in times where taking a little extra care to keep things clean and sanitized, you'll run into a lot less problems. One thing that you can do is as you get close to the end of boil, is in the last 15 minutes or so, if you're using a wort chiller, it's time to put it in, so that way I think it's good and sanitized and ready to use. Go ahead and start hooking up your hoses, getting all that stuff ready. Some people use the outside hose, garden hose, to feed water to their wort chiller. I've seen some people have additions under their sinks or able to adapt their faucet to it. Back when I was using my wort chiller, I did things like have the garden hose hooked to adapt it to my wort chiller, and then had the exit go into the sink. And then I always had that stall out at about 100 degrees. Try to take that kettle, put it in the sink, ice bath it down, stir, and kind of keep the water circulating through the wort chiller to get that beer down to pitching temperature. I also had like a small little pond pump that I hooked up to the entry of the to the supply side of the wort chiller to supply it. That worked out pretty good, but I also had to like have a cooler that I put ice water in that, and so all that stuff was more stuff for me to clean, more stuff for me to keep up with and store, trip over, things like that. I decided to kind of take a different approach. Please do your own research with what I'm fixing to say next. I no chill. At flame out or time to turn the heat off, I turn the heat off, put my lid over it, and just let it cool down naturally over time. Oftentimes it doesn't take too long, especially when you're only talking about 2.5 gallons of wort. I mean, if you needed to, you could probably take it and put it in the sink with some water and some ice and kind of get it to come down quicker. I don't want a bunch of more things to clean on brew day. I don't want a whole bunch more things. And in my opinion, there's just a lot of wastewater that comes with when you're chilling with a wort chiller. All that water's got to go somewhere. It's more water to your water bill. It's more ice that you have to keep on hand. It's more ice to have to go get, or whatever the case may be with that. And so I just try to make brew day as simple and as easy as possible. If a wort chiller is something that you absolutely love, or a plate chiller or anything like that, like, more power to you. I've brewed with some guys that's all they use, and it's great. Like, you know, you could probably get something down to pitching temperature, 15-30 minutes or so, but you also have to have some more pumps, some more hoses, some more pipes, a lot of water, and I just don't like to deal with all that. It is an alternative way to do things. Doing it with the no chill, just make sure that you've done your own research, you know what's at risk. I kind of advocate that everybody try it at least once and see how much easier it is for you, see if it's within your style. Granted, you save some time on the front end, but on the back end, you have to keep checking on things, make sure that it's coming down on temperature in a timely fashion. You always run the risk of an infection when you do it, so just like I said, before you do it, make sure you do your own research. So once it's come down in temperature fast enough and safe enough to pitch your yeast at pitching temperature, you've got a couple of different ways to do this. You can let it be just a little bit warmer and go ahead and transfer all that wort that's in the kettle into your fermenter, and then top that off with water, and hopefully it brings it back down into the degree temperature that you need to pitch at. I've done it to where, I've poured it in there about 100 degrees and then added my water, brought it down to about 80, and then kind of given it a little bit of time to come down. You can also directly put it in there when it is pitching temperature, and then put some water in there to bring it back up to level where you need your volume at it for 5 gallons, and for pitching temp or to pitch your yeast. So I've also seen people go ahead and get it to the 5 gallons, put it in a refrigerator that they've got, or there's a couple different options that you can do as far as temperature control. I'm just trying for a very, very basic way to brew to present it. So what I did was I no chilled, waited until it was right about room temp, went ahead and topped it off with water, and got ready for pitching. Another thing to be aware of was when you're taking that wort and you're pouring it into the fermenter, you're gonna have a lot of stuff at the bottom of the kettle, be it if you chill or if you no chill. All those proteins and things like that are gonna be at the bottom. So you wanna keep those out of the fermenter as much as possible. So as you dump it, just watch and try to maintain a good, steady, even flow. You don't wanna dump it over all at one time. And that'll help you create clean beer. You can use one of those like siphon or transfer pumps and do it. But as I add wort and water into the fermenter, I try to make sure that it collects a lot of air in that thing, get it nice and aerated. Once you're topped off at the 5 gallons, you'll want to go ahead and take a gravity reading. This can be done with a couple ways. A hydrometer is one way, a refractometer is another way. As long as you make sure that your refractometer is calibrated with distilled water, and you make sure that it's reading where it needs to be at the correct temperature, you're good there. Same with your hydrometer. You want to make sure that that thing is calibrated, know where that thing's supposed to lay at. Now, it's very important to me and to a lot of other home brewers that you take readings when you're supposed to, so that way you can help diagnose it. Things like if you have a stuck fermentation, if you have something else going on. Often you'll have people ask you, oh, what was your starting gravity? What was your finishing gravity? You'll also need those 2 gravity readings most importantly, so you know what the ABV of your beer is. You know, if your starting gravity was good, but your finishing gravity was higher than it was supposed to be, and you have a lower ABV beer, you know, then it's time to talk about like what happened. Did you have a bad temperature range to ferment at, or did your yeast die out for some reason or something like that? A word of caution when using a refractometer is once you've pitched yeast and you've started producing alcohol, you can no longer use that refractometer. It will not be accurate. Having said that, there is a calculator out there to be able to get you close enough to get a good idea of where you're at, but it's always best to confirm that, or at least take a reading with a hydrometer once there's alcohol present. It doesn't matter if it's 1% or 10%, it's gonna be off in some kind of way. That bit me in the butt really, really hard a few years ago when I was really stepping up brewing. I got a refractometer and I was like, all right, I don't have to waste these samples of things to take a reading at. I can use this refractometer. And suddenly I kept getting low ABV, low ABV, low ABV, missing my final gravity reading. Couldn't figure out why. Had a discussion with someone and they said, what are you using for your readings at the end? And I told them my refractometer, so I got taken to school on that. That's a very handy piece of information that I try to pass to all new home brewers. Is refractometer is great to use. Just know when to use it, and at the end of fermentation or during fermentation is not the best way to do it. So after you've taken your sample out of your fermenter to get your readings, a good thing to do is to snap that lid on really good, put your finger over that little hole there for the airlock, and give it a good shake for about a minute and a half or so. To just introduce more oxygen into the wort. It's one of those things you almost can't get too much oxygen into the wort. The yeast are really going to need that oxygen as well as the sugars that are in that wort that you've prepared for them. So the more oxygen you get in there, the better at this point. After fermentation starts there for a little bit, just to keep things simple, it's best not to introduce any more oxygen. It's best to not open up that lid as much as possible. You want to leave all that at a minimum. There's things that you can do, like if you get a stuck fermentation, but let's just not even discuss that right now. Let's just keep things simple. When you go to get ready to put the airlock into the fermenter, you'll want to make sure that you have sanitation solution in there, sanitized water or something like that in that airlock. You want to try to make sure that you're not going to run the potential risk of some of that going back in through the airlock into your wort, because at that point in time everything is going to be going on in there and you don't want to introduce the chance of an infection. The airlock, you have two different types. You have the like 3-piece and then like the S type or whatever it's called. Its job is to make sure that particles stay out of your fermentation vessel during fermentation, things like bugs and just dust and all that stuff. So it lets gas escape but keeps things out. So after everything's aerated in your fermenter, it's time to pitch the yeast. You can do a couple different things here. If you're using dry yeast or it's your first couple brews, go ahead and cut open that with some sanitized scissors. Pitch your yeast directly onto it, close that lid off, just put that thing in a nice, cool, dry place that's not gonna get a huge amount of sunlight on it or be bumped around or have people walking on it or anything like that. If you're using like liquid yeast, you might want to make sure you look at the date, make sure that it's within time. You might have to work up some kind of yeast starter or just some kind of vitality starter just to get it going. You can rehydrate the yeast in a little bit of water, or if you no chill like me, you can take a little sample, maybe the night before you pitch or something like that, and sprinkle some of that yeast in that wort a little bit before you go to pitch it, so that way you kind of got a little bit of a jump start. You decrease some of that lag time. You will see it takes a little bit most of the time to get some airlock activity. It's for the fermentation to really get going. I've had it go like 24 hours. It didn't matter if I no chilled or if I did chill. That it took about 24 hours on a few brews for it to kind of get going using dry yeast. So just beware that it might take a minute. Now, airlock activity does not necessarily indicate that fermentation has kicked off or hasn't kicked off or isn't still going. I've had beers that have had almost no airlock on it whatsoever, or I'm not back there in the room when the air bubble has gone off and it's still dropping. So it's a good indication that fermentation is going on, but that doesn't mean that it is ended. So I mostly ferment at room temperature majority of the times. There are some outliers. There are some styles that are coming out that I'm going to be doing that I have to make sure that are fermented at a cooler temperature than my room temperature. There are some times when I use quake or that I'm kettle souring. I can't do that at room temperature, so I got to bring it up on that. A lot of that isn't necessarily super beginner friendly. There are some basic structures to it that we'll talk about at a later date and share some information with that. But as far as like just basic room fermentation, most ale strains of yeast can handle it. You might get an off flavor or two, but as long as you pick a style that's not like super dependent on like a lager or something like that, you could probably get away with it and it'll make a decent beer to drink. That's what we've done today with this cream ale, is a room temp fermentation. So after fermentation's kicked off, it's best to wait probably about a good 2 weeks. Most styles that you'll be fermenting, especially starting off in kit format, will be a 2-week fermentation. After 2 weeks is up, it's a good time to go ahead and take a gravity reading, record that, and wait until you get that same gravity reading 3 days essentially in a row before you're ready to move on to the next stage, which is bottling. So the way that I do it and the way that a few other guys do it is we'll take a reading on day 1, record it, and then wait a day, don't mess with it, and then on the 3rd day take a reading. If on the 3rd day it's the same reading as your first reading post fermentation, then you're ready to move into bottling. You can let it hang out for another day or two, maybe confirm the reading. If you've had a little bit of a wacky fermentation, I've had to do that a few times. Another thing that you can do is reconfirm that right before you go to bottle. If say it looks like it's done and you're ready to bottle technically on Monday, but you can't get it till Friday, maybe on Friday go ahead and just confirm it that it's good to go. There's a couple different ways that you can take your final gravity reading. You can take a sample right out of the fermenter with like a sanitized cup or something like that. You can go ahead and move it into a different vessel. They call it secondary. Maybe your secondary vessel has a drain spigot on it. Myself and some other people, we would normally recommend against doing that. The least amount of time that you touch your beer is the least amount of times that you run the risk of fermenting it. So if you're constantly moving it and sticking things in there, the more likely of a chance that you have an infection, or that you can cause yourself an infection in that brew is you just increase it every time that you do it. So what I normally do is, and again, please do your own research, know what's at risk here. I take my hydrometer and I just drop it in the fermenter and I take my reading. Make sure that's sanitized before I do it, pull it out, go rinse it off, get soap and water on it, dry it off, sanitize it again, put it up, and then I do it again. That goes against the grain. I'm sure some people will throw a fit on me even suggesting that, but that's just how I've done it. Knock on wood, I've done well with doing that. I haven't had any issues as far as that goes. So again, please do that at your own risk. Know what could happen. So it's bottling day. The best thing for you to do at this point, in my opinion, would be to go ahead and get your priming solution going. Go ahead, get your water boiling for it. Go ahead, dump your water or your sugar in there after you've reached boil. Again, you want to kind of treat this like you did with the malt extract. You want to pull it off heat. You want to go ahead, cut open that bag, put your sugar in the boiling water, stir it up, let it get good mixed up. Once it's good mixed up and I've got a clear solution, I often will go ahead and take the lid, put it on top of that, let it kind of come down, quite a few degrees. Then I'll go ahead, stick it in the refrigerator for about an hour or so, let it kind of come down the rest of the temp that I need it to be able to move forward with bottling. For the priming sugar to come down in temperature, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and start sanitizing bottles. Now I've done this a few different ways. When I first started off, we had a dish drying rack. And so I would take those bottles, I would make the solution in my bottling bucket, and then I would take every bottle and I'd put it in the solution. I'd probably do about 9 at a time, pull them out, shake them up, make sure that they're good sanitized, dump them back out into the solution, and then start putting them on the dish drying rack, so that way a lot of that stuff would get out of there. If you use a solution like Star San, you don't have to get every bit of foam out of there. It's supposed to be a non-rinse deal. Majority of the time, the way that I do things now is I've got a little sanitizer. It's like pump action. You put the bottle over the nipple, you push down a few times, it sprays up a sanitized amount into that bottle. You let it drain back into that reservoir, and then I put it on my bottling tree. I'll leave it there, let it kind of get most of that stuff out of there, and then I'll move on to bottling shortly after that. A good practice to do is to make sure that you go ahead and have all your bottles clean and ready to go before they're sanitized. Go ahead and have your labels peeled if you're using like commercial beer bottles or other bottles that you've collected from other homebrewers. One of my biggest irritations when I've shared homebrew is that I'll send a 6-pack off with someone. They won't rinse them out. I've gotten them back with cigarette butts in them and just other trash. And I used to try really hard to get all that stuff out, but at some point in time I've collected so many bottles that if I get some with cigarette butts in there, I just never share homebrew with them anymore. I throw that bottle away. It's not worth it for me to stress out about getting a bottle clean. You know, bottles can be expensive from time to time, especially when you gotta buy a whole bunch. But generally, once you get going and you kind of are in the network of other home brewers, there's just a great big bottle exchange, and then people will say, hey, I've got a whole case of bottles I can't do nothing with. Can you take them off my hands? Or, you know, commercial homebrew. When it comes to bottling, make sure that you're using pop top type bottles for these crown type caps. So here's an example of a pop top type bottle. So as long as you gotta use a bottle opener to get it open, that's probably gonna be one. I've tested those twist lock ones before by capping them. They hold water, but they do not hold carbonation, and so it's one of those things, it's not even worth it. I've gotten to the point when I'm buying commercial beer, if it's got like one of those like really super glued on type ones, labels on it, then I just chunk it. It's not worth it for me to spend an hour or so cleaning the bottle to get it ready. If I can't dunk it in water and leave it in hot soaky water for a little bit, then it's not worth me to continue to chase that bottle. Another option for bottles are these like swing top type bottles. I haven't ever used them for beer. I bottled a few for this particular brew to experiment with. So that's going to be exciting here in a moment to check out. So the setup for bottling day, you'll have a bottling bucket, you'll have the fermenter, your siphon tubes, a stir paddle, the priming solution ready to go, some sanitizer for bottles and stuff like that, in case maybe you didn't make enough at that point in time. You'll have some ready to get some bottles clean. Your sanitized bottles, some kind of bottle capper, be it the two-handed over the top kind or the bench top bottle caps. I also like to make sure that I have some rags handy to be able to clean bottles in case I spill some beer over the side, clean up a mess real quick. A bottling wand is a handy tool to have too. I actually, in the however many years I've been homebrewing, I never used a bottling wand until this brew. I wanted to make sure that I approached it from a very beginner's level. Before, what I was doing was I was just taking the bottle, putting it up to the spigot, turning it on a little bit slowly until it came up. I was introducing some oxygen into the beers. That's neither here nor there really. I never really detected a problem up until now, but because I'm gonna be focused on trying to enter more competitions, I'm gonna start using that bottle wand for here on out. It made it fairly easy. The reason why I didn't use it before, I don't think I had enough hose, or I couldn't find hose to go from the bottling bucket to the wand. whatever, I put that thing away, forgot about it, and then about 5-6 later, here I am now trying it for the first time. I've done it on the last several brews. It's come out well. It makes a lot less of a messier situation for sure from time to time. So when you're bottling, the first thing that I always like to do is to take the priming sugar, go ahead and pour it into the bottling bucket with that spigot shut off. Of course, please make sure that that thing is turned off. I've only ever made that mistake one time, but if I can save you a little bit of a mess and a little bit of time, that's probably one of the biggest places that I can do it, is please make sure that valve is off. But go ahead and add your priming sugar once it's cooled off and it's basically more or less at room temperature. And then you can go ahead and transfer your beer on it with a siphon tube or that siphon, auto siphon, or a siphon hose. I've had to find myself before with homebrew that's I was gonna drink it. I've taken a tube before and just siphoned it out of a glass carboy because my auto siphon was broke and then my other one wouldn't fit down there, so I had to take a hose and siphon it out that way. Then what you want to do is you want to very easily, very slowly, very softly go ahead and stir in that priming sugar into the beer. It's beer at this point. There's pitch yeast on it. It has alcohol, so it's beer. But go ahead and start mixing up that priming sugar, because that priming sugar is going to interact with some of the yeast that's still in that beer, and that's what's going to build the carbonation in the bottles. So to make sure that you have a good, even mixture in there, like batch priming, you can do it this way. Wait 15 minutes for that solution to kind of get into the beer. Make sure that you're not going wild stirring it up. You do not want to add any oxygen at this point in time. So another way to carbonate bottles that I've seen, I don't have a whole lot of experience with it, is those carbonation tabs. I've done that on a very, very few beers. They've come out great, but I don't have a whole lot of experience with that. The only other additional thing that I've seen people do is they'll take some alternative sugars or whatever, or they'll measure out the sugar into precise grams, dump them in every little bottle that they're fixing a bottle, and then add the wort in there, or add the beer in there, so that way it gets good mixed up on an individual deal. I've seen people say that they've had great success with even carbonation across the board. I've only ever had a few, in the grand scheme of things, had problems be slightly overcarbed. Most of the time, if I pull one and it's got a good bit of carbonation to it, they've all pretty much got that. Maybe I carved it up a little bit too high for the style, or the yeast got extremely ecstatic. I've had some problems with a few, or one particular yeast strain, Hothead Quake. I had a bunch of bottle bombs with that strain for whatever reason. Every time it sees sugar, it's just ready to get going again. And the last time that I brewed with it, fortunately, I only had 3 bottles explode on me. They were put up. I was well aware that that could happen, because that was the 3rd time that I have used that yeast. That is no longer going to be a yeast that I plan on putting in beers that I plan on bottling. That's going to be reserved for a keg only type of beer. So while you're waiting for that 15 minutes for that carbonation, or 15 minutes for that solution to get dissolved into the beer, now's a good time to take a few minutes, go ahead and clean up your priming sugar pan and all that kind of stuff. Go ahead and start, getting your siphon stuff cleaned up, and take readings of your before and after gravity readings to figure out your ABV. It's always good to know if you've kind of hit the target and that way you can move forward. I know at that point you're kind of already, if you haven't done it yet, it's past time at that point to really do anything about it. But majority of the time you've already made beer, so might as well continue down the path. As I'm bottling, I try to make sure that I have about an inch worth of space under the bottom part of the crown or the bottom part of the lip of the bottle to the top of the fluid level. I don't know. It's a little bit more beer than you get commercially, but I just think that it looks better, fuller in the bottle after everything's said and done that way. Using the capper, the two-handed or the bench capper, it doesn't matter really. I prefer the bench capper now at this point. I've used it pretty much exclusively for like the last year and a half, 2 years of brewing. It's really kind of just made it easier to knock out beers a little bit quicker, in my opinion. I've had one bottle explode on me while I was using that two-handed deal. I just got into it too vigorously. I had put way too much pressure on the glass. I guess it could happen with the bench one too. So just be careful. Don't go nuts on these things. But I do like to turn the bottle and make sure that the crimp, be it on the two-handed one or the bench one, has gone down on it about 3 times to make sure that it's got a nice, good, even seal. A 5-gallon batch should make about 48 bottles worth of beers or 2 cases, depending on things like your bottle sizes. A lot of your European like Trappist type bottles are 11.2 ounces or so. Most standard bottles that you'll find at the homebrew store are 12 ounces. There's a few pints out there. I think the majority of these the swing top type bottles, I think they're a full pint at 16 ounces. So there's going to be a little bit of give and take. If you're using like those 22 ounce bombers too, that could throw a little bit of a wrench in your plan of having 48 bottles ready. Or if you use a mixture of all those bottles, you might have to just kind of be ready to get a couple more bottles ready if you haven't done it before. After bottling, I like to let brews sit around for about a month before tasting them. Most kits will tell you 2 weeks or so after bottling, it's good to go ahead and taste test. I find after having run a few experiments letting beer sit around for about a month that they're pretty good to taste. I will take like that extra glass that's at the bottom of the fermenter, or I'll make sure that I'm able to have a glass. Even if I end up with 47 beers going into cases, I like to taste it and see what it tastes like, because I've put a lot of hard work into it at this point, so might as well get some kind of reward. But so about a month in, most of the green hoppiness should fade away. There are some kind of fermentation issues that you could have happened, some off flavors that, given some time, they can clean up. Some of the bigger beers, like some Belgian beers or stouts or imperial stouts, quads, things like that, they may need a lot longer time in the bottle to do things like build up carbonation. They may need some more time to get rid of some of the fermentation off flavors too, or meld together a little bit better. But generally most styles within a month should be ready to go, like saisons, cream ales, blondes, most stouts, most of your general ones. The only one that I really had that I tasted less than within 2 weeks was at week 1 full week in the bottle. I taste tested my raw ale, which was released not that long ago, and that thing was freaking crazy. That thing was about fully carved up, tasted nice, was great. I just started drinking them all the time after that. Like, you know, let's see what it tastes like a week and 2 days after it's been in the bottle. Let's see what it tastes like a week and a half after it's been in the bottle. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you know, just whenever. Because that had such a short shelf life on it, I wanted to make sure that I caught it in its prime, and so I was kind of trying to learn when that would be. But that thing was freaking amazing a week into the bottle. So now it's time to talk about the beer. I know that this wasn't necessarily meant as a quote-unquote grain to glass or taste test. I mean, it kind of was. This was more about the processes of home brewing, but we've sat around a lot here. We've talked about a lot of things. There was a lot of information thrown, so it's time for a cold beer. So this is the cream ale. This is the extract version. Here. So one thing to remember about Extract Brewing is the beer is going to end up a little bit darker than it normally would any other time than like with all grain. Now this thing is pretty clean and clear. Got a really good amount of carbonation on it. But super clean, super clear. You can see all the little bubbles coming up for the carbonation. Do not see any faults as far as that goes. I think it's a little bit darker than it probably should be, but there's only so much control that we can have with extracts. So for the instructions with this thing, the fermentables was 6.6 pounds of Pilsen liquid malt extract, 1 pound Pilsen dry malt extract. The steeping grains were 8 ounces of carapils, 8 ounces of flaked oats. The hop additions were 1 ounce of Willamette at 60 minutes, 1 ounces of Willamette at 5 minutes, and then 1 package of USO 5. I added the Warflock tablet in the yeast nutrient, Warflock tablet at 15 minutes, and the yeast nutrient at 10 minutes. I didn't use the hot basket in this particular brew. Like I said, I was trying to kick it more of just a regular person trying to attempt homebrew at the first time with the least amount of money wrapped up into it. I think with adding the hops in there and all that, the Warflock tablet and all that stuff, I think it came out really clean looking. Now with the projected original gravity, it was supposed to be 1.045. I got 1.048. The final gravity was supposed to be 1.012, and the final gravity ended up being 1.010. The estimated ABV 4.99, or I'm sorry, 5%. I got 4.995%. Total amount of IBUs is supposed to be 12. Description for the style is a clean, attentive, flavorful American lawnmower beer that's easy drinking and refreshing. and it has more character than the typical American lager. So now that this thing's kind of settled down a little bit, got some foam in my nose. So now that this thing's settled down a little bit, it smells pretty sweet and malty. The sweetness is probably going to be coming from the flaked corn in there. Was it flaked corn? Yeah, coming from the flaked corn. Tastes pretty good. We've had quite a few of these during a party not terribly long ago, and it was kind of a favorite of everybody. Again, there it is. A little bit darker in color, but pretty good tasting. I think it's right down the middle of what it's supposed to be. It's a great beer. Tastes good. Tastes a little bit malty, a little bit sweet. Seems to be fairly well balanced. Catch a little bit of the hop bitterness on the back end, but really good. Really good lawnmower beer there. So the last little bit in the bottle as a home brewer, it's going to be a lot of the yeast down there. People call it the yeast cookie or whatever. A lot of people that don't like homebrew or are unaccustomed to it, that's one of their complaints is that last little bit in there, that accumulation of the yeast and the priming sugar to add carbonation to your beer. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother a few people that I know, but that is one thing that I've had a lot of people complain about when sharing homebrew with them. Now, to move on into a small experiment of this, as I said, I have never used these flip top bottle tops for beers. So I figured it'd be a nice comparison to see if the carbonation's any more, any less, did I do it right, or whatever. So here goes. Seem to have a good bit of carbonation, so that's good. Really good amount of carbonation. I'd say probably almost more so than this guy over here. Looked to be about the same color, so that's good. Well, that worked out pretty well. So those bottles will work good too for a beginner home brewer. I guess with all of that said, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you stopping by. If there's anything that you can think of as a more experienced home brewer that you could advise a beginner home brewer, please leave that in the comments. If you feel like I've missed anything, let me know. And if there's anything else you'd like to see as far as a home brewer beginner brewers series, let me know. We have a few other videos that will be coming along shortly in this style for this particular topic that I think a lot of people will find interesting. So thanks again, appreciate it. Good thing we got that on film, Duncan.
No cloaks given.